Okay, now we're going to go from polar to rectangular. So this is a trickier direction. Again, we're going to use those equations on your equation sheet. So let's remind ourselves what is going to be useful to us here. Here, we know that r squared equals x squared plus y squared. And we know that theta is tan inverse of y over x. And that is all we need. We are going to do, I think it is really helpful to do a little sketch so that you can see what quadrant to expect your final answer in, because sometimes if you have two negatives, you have to do a little work with the unit circle to figure out what your angle should be. Sometimes it'll look like a first quadrant angle from your algebra, but you'll know, hey, that was third quadrant, so it should be a third quadrant angle. So remember, we are given here x and y, and we want our theta. That's what we want. Okay, let's do it. So first, to get r, we need to do x squared plus y squared and take the square root. So you can write it as r squared equals x squared plus y squared, or you can just go ahead and take that square root to start. I kind of like to write it like that. Square root of 3 squared plus negative 1 squared. So square root of 3 squared is 3, negative 1 squared is 1. So our r is 2. And theta is tan inverse, or arctan, of y over x, so negative 1 over radical 3. Now, I was really careful this year to make sure I gave you all ratios, all points that are going to give you nice places on your unit circle. So you should be able to do this without using your calculator at all. So I like to, instead of looking at negative 1 over radical 3, I know that that's the same as negative radical 3 over 3. Now, before I decide what that angle is, well, first I know it's a 6 because of our little way to memorize that. 3 plus 3 is 6. But let's look back at what quadrant this rectangular coordinate point should be in. So I have a positive x and a negative y. So I should be in quadrant 4. And that's important. That tells me what 6 should be. So this isn't just any 6, it's 11 pi over 6. So our angle, or I'm sorry, our polar coordinates for radical 3, negative 1 is 2, 11 pi over 6. Our theta. Same process for these other two problems, just more practice, making sure we get that into long-term memory, which is the whole goal here, okay? So same thing, r is square root of x squared plus y squared. And that's going to take me a step or two, so 16 plus, that is going to be 16 times 3. And I end up with 64 under my square root, and the square root of 64 is 8. So my r is going to be 8. Theta is arctan, or tan inverse, of y over x, negative 4 radical 3 over negative 4. And that reduces to just tan inverse, or arctan, of radical 3. Let's look back at which quadrant this should be in. So if I have two negatives and I'm in rectangular coordinates, that means I should be in quadrant 3. And if And since I'm doing tan inverse of radical 3, that means I need some pi over 3. And the pi over 3 that happens in the third quadrant is 4 pi over 3. So that's absolutely how I work through that. It takes me a couple seconds to think through the quadrant and the unit circle value, but it gets you there. R theta. One more example. Lots of negatives, lots of radical 3s, just trying to give you some good examples that you can do without using your calculator. All right, here, R is square root of negative 6 squared plus 6 radical 3 squared. Remember, when you're squaring that 6 radical 3, first, when you're squaring that negative, it's going to be a positive 36. When you're squaring the 6 radical 3, you got to square the 6, which is 36, and you have to square the radical 3, which is 3. You end up with 144 under that square root, and the square root of 144 is 12. All right, this time, before we get into our tangent issue here, let's go ahead and figure out what quadrant we're in. Our x is negative and our y is positive, so we're going to be in quadrant 2. So when we do our tan, we're going to get that value and then make sure we put that angle in quadrant 2. Remember, our tan really only lives in quadrant 1 and 4, but in this context, we know we're going to be using it with this like plus 180 when x is less than 0. And we're taking care that is on your equation sheet. We're taking care of that plus 180 when x is less than 0 by figuring out that quadrant. Okay, so y over x, so 6 radical 3 over negative 6. And here our x is negative, so if we were going to use our calculator and get this angle value, we would have to add 180. We take care of that. We don't have to do that when we use our unit circle knowledge here. So our 6 is canceled, so it's negative radical 3. And of course, that's a pi over 3, and the pi over 3 that happens in quadrant 2 is 2 pi over 3. So in polar coordinates, this point is 12, 2 pi. R is 12, theta is 2 pi over 3. All right,